Thank you, Volker. It's such a pleasure to be in Berlin and such an honor to be hosted by you. Volker co-hosted this amazing conference on generative AI, really wonderful speakers, and he edited the volume, as he said, and really worth checking it out. You know, everybody is talking about AI right now. And I want to tell you today why I wrote this book, why I've been writing in a certain way, very much, as you said, constructively and cautiously optimistic. And it kind of suggests that that's the only way probably to proceed. But maybe first I like to get some kind of audience participation at first. So let me ask you, how many of you have a smartphone? Everybody. How many of you are wearing a wearable with AI, like my Apple Watch right now? Nobody. Okay. How many of you tomorrow, if you had to get to the airport here in Berlin, you open your Uber app or another application, and it offers you a autonomous vehicle, a self-driving robo-taxi? How many of you would get at the back with nobody at the wheel? No, like just your decision. Okay, so I see three. Volker asks about the regulation, but of course the regulation is connected to how we feel about it, right? So this is very typical. I've been literally on this world tour right now. I'll mention some of it, but asking these questions in the United States and in Japan and here in Geneva and Amsterdam and Berlin and Tel Aviv and other places around the world. And we have these kind of, I think, dichotomies where we're embracing a lot of AI that's around us in our interactions, but also not really understanding the benefits of AI that's on us, that's sometimes even in us, and fearing some other applications. And that's a lot of what motivated me to kind of research this, of thinking about these related sets of questions. So I'll show you three questions that I think are really have to be answered in conjunction to one another. First, how or can we and how can we build equality machines or liberty machines or AI for good machines and really deploy them and give everybody around in our society access to them. Second, how do we think rationally about AI and its benefits? And for you economists, I was going to say that it's an honor to be hosted by Volker, but also just the Weizenbaum Institute, as he mentioned, is such a great place to be talking about these things, because you all are interdisciplinary thinkers that think about law and regulation, but then also about economics and psychology and behavioral sciences and computers and technology and all the kind of interconnected things of the social sciences and the real sciences. And I think that thinking rationally about AI is a frontier for thought leaders that is really important to put the impact on. And I know that Weizenbaum was a leader in that. He actually is featured in the Equality Machine in the book. I talk about Eliza and kind of the early days of chatbots. I am probably critical of the fact that Eliza as a chatbot personal assistant is probably the first personal assistant, followed then by Siri and Alexa and all those who are gendered. And I question why our personal assistants, digital personal assistants, got a female name, a female voice. Why were those the defaults? And it's actually part of my thinking in the equality machine is, how do we switch it up, and how do we change defaults, and why do we decide to create embodied robots with AI versus disembodied AI, and how do we interact with these machines, and do we gender them, do we make them humanoids versus animals, and I'll show you some things about that. And then, of course, connected to these questions of how do we build AI that's for good or for the public benefits, how do we think about it rationally, and then how especially legal scholars, attorneys, policymakers can direct all of this by beneficial, constructive AI governance. And in fact, I have a new article that's called the AI Regulatory Pyramid that's coming out soon, where I do more of that legal work of mapping the different toolbox that is emerging in AI. So if you're interested in that, that's, I think, already online. But what I suggest is that we always have a lot of toolboxes, or a lot of tools in our toolbox when we're doing policy. And it has to be some mix and combination between private ordering, private market direction. Ideally, you know, the base is always industry standard setting and voluntary best practices and competition, and that actually relates to my previous books. I think a lot about market competition and innovation policy, and how do we incentivize all these markets to create and to give us consumer choice and a lot of, you know, product design and innovation. And then we kind of escalate the kinds of regulatory solutions when things go wrong or create harm. So like all the way at the top, if you think about regulatory theory, it's always been the case that only at the top of the pyramid and kind of the small slice of everything that we do in society is very controlled. And so like actual bans on certain activities, certain behaviors, certain products. However, when I look at what's happening with Europe, of course, being a leader in the AI landscape of regulation of the landscape of regulation of AI and its ecosystem, but also around the world, I think we had this tipping point, and it's a lot of times it's kind of this pendulum where there was more techno-optimism in the past, then there was a lot of a techlash in the past decade. Probably most salient has been a lot of discontent, a lot of worry, a lot of fear, a lot of alarmist discussions, both by public intellectuals, by scholars from different, I think, different disciplines, and also reflected in what governments have been doing and promulgating as laws. And so I suggest that, and my research shows this, I think that we've had this kind of lopsided or skewed focus on the bans, and that's not how I think the best way to move with regulating new technologies, especially since AI is not one technology. So we have, a lot of times we have these misleading conversations and metaphors even about AI. So we kind of compare it to the nuclear bomb, and you saw it, probably you saw the moratorium call and the kind of tech scholars, leaders that said, let's slow down the development of AI, the research of AI for a few months, and there was a comparison there of AI being similar to the nuclear bomb. And of course, AI means a lot of different things. There's a huge spectrum of what it actually is. And my argument consistently has been that we absolutely should think about the risks. We absolutely should think about the riskiest types of AI on the spectrum. So the very powerful, artificial general intelligence, that kind of fear of AI becoming really autonomous to the extent of us losing control over it. But there's something that's been also very distracting in the conversation of focusing more on that than the technology that we actually have right now, and thinking that we can regulate as a one-shot all of these different technologies. For example, a lot of AI applications, whether it's in health or education, schooling, care, in work, like hiring applications, in looking at pay and performance, government services, enforcement, all of these different sectors, which, the book is kind of built in that way of looking at these different sectors and fields of integration of AI, is really, these are algorithms that are helping us in sorting, in assisting human decision-making, replacing sometimes human decision-making, but in a very focused way of kind of using computational powers to mine through much more data and being directed for a single use, not a general use. And of course, now we also have ChatGPT and these, general pre-trained large language models, but still, they're not anywhere close to being, that kind of independent general application that will make its own decisions in, all these different sectors. And what is very important to me is that we never lose focus of the benefits alongside the risks. So when I say benefits, what I was just talking about is part of it, but I just want to give us examples. For example, in health, I think there's a lot of low-hanging fruit. And I think that we've been pretty slow in integrating these very, very beneficial, life-saving technologies. So only recently has, in the United States, the federal government, the Federal Food and Drug Administration, the FDA, that approves medical devices, has been approving a few hundreds applications, mostly in radiology and screening. So like a bot mammogram that is replacing human radiologists, but also in surgery and other places and other applications. I actually talked to an orthopedic surgeon in California who said that his colleague in Germany is actually allowed to use a surgeon bot to replace him in orthopedic specific applications that is not approved in the United States. So there's a lot of variance. I don't know enough about how fast or how slow has it been in Germany. Volker just said that autonomous cars are not approved, and we can talk more about that, and I will talk more about that. But sometimes, and I'll just kind of preview what I'm going to say in a bit, sometimes the fact that we're not deploying these technologies, we're not allowing them yet, has nothing to do with their readiness, with their safety and accuracy, but other reasons. And I do a lot of work in kind of showing how there's a lot of conflation between the debates about the technology readiness and the technology effects on society. For example, drivers, truck drivers or taxi drivers losing their jobs. Not that that part is not important, but I think from an economics perspective, it would be a real mistake to conflate the two and link them in a way that loses the benefits to society from technology that is already here. Another example of an application, this is kind of an embodied AI. How many of you have heard of Paro, the baby seal? Yeah, so a couple of you. You may have seen it in popular culture, like in The Simpsons. Bart Simpson goes to visit his grandfather, and they have like a parrot in the care facility. What is even less known, and the three that have heard of parrot, I'll ask you, did you know that parrot, this baby seal robot, is FDA approved? So approved as a medical device. So no, so it's not really known that his technology or its technology or her technology, however you want to think about this, this pet, has been through a lot of clinical trials, and it has been shown that giving a patient Paro helps battle dementia, cognitive loss, Alzheimer's, and even just loneliness for everybody. So the state of New York, for example, bought a lot of Paros to people who were living on their own during the pandemic. Paro has facial recognition and emotional recognition technology that can really personalize its interactions with a patient. It can recognize if it's sad or if it is slow, if it didn't take, if the patient didn't take her drugs, her medicine. It can communicate with others, alert caretakers, record all kinds of movements if the patient is slower, all kinds of things that are really beneficial. And something that, again, I think is a misconception with technology, and especially AI and digital technology, we tend to assume that when you introduce technology, whether it's in schools for children or like in elderly facilities, then you make us more isolated. But in fact, Paro has been shown to create more connection. Like in a care facility, the patient that has Paro becomes more interactive with their caretaker, with fellow patients. So it's kind of intermediates between humans. So again, I very much like to go against, to kind of use facts and empiricism. We said that at the conference on this week. I think Christopher, you said, we want to be analysis-based and fact-based, and other people said empirical and science-based, and not just epithets and like mindsets and just false misconceptions about what happens with certain technologies. And I'll just anecdotally, I mentioned the pandemic. I was writing the book, just after Volker interviewed me remotely because it was the pandemic on his show, 10+1 Questions, his award-winning show. I was writing the book, and I had planned to travel to Japan to do some research about why have the Japanese and also Korean government and culture been at the cutting edge of developing embodied robots and kind of thinking about it, robotics and AI in a more constructive, positive way than what I was seeing maybe in the West. But there was the pandemic, so I ended up researching it remotely. But here, actually, I am with Dr. Shibata, who is the inventor of Paro, the Japanese researcher, in Geneva this summer at the AI for Good United Nations conference. And then also happily, I became the United States G7 representative of the World Economic Forum to Japan's digital transformation after the book came out just a few months later, and I did get to travel to Tokyo. So there's been a lot of kind of these, of course, the dynamicism of where we are right now, things constantly are changing. So that's another very important point about when you're thinking about regulation of AI or just talking about benefits and costs, and when you're talking about fails and risks when you're talking about harms and wrongs versus, you know, the readiness of the technology. Things are so fast-moving, so dynamic that something that, again, really is like a pet peeve of mine is that I've documented a lot of ways where, like, we're talking about outdated moments of the technology itself. I'll say again more about that, but just like how there's going to, like, sometimes you'll see the rehashing of the same stories that are already not relevant to where the application is right now. Another just kind of low-hanging fruit from medicine is how in healthcare there's been, I think, quite a bit of excitement with helping the field of medical doctors and healthcare professionals use all kinds, I've mentioned already, like specific applications for surgery and diagnostics, but also just for patient care in general using AI. So as you probably know, ChatGPT already passes the medical exams to get into med school. It's also passing the bar exams in the United States to get into law school. It's passing the GMAT. And, you know, of course, that's, in a lot of ways, that's scary, but that's also an amazing opportunity. So in healthcare, I think, you know, it's useful to think about maybe 5 different kinds of ways in which the greatest breakthrough in medicine and healthcare are happening today with the use of AI. So first is just the really basic science. You know, there's been new drugs, new discoveries of proteins and different knowledge about just connections between genetics and our overall health, risk factors that are making huge leaps using the computational power of large data sets and AI kind of autonomously finding these links that we as humans would not be able to see. And then applying it at the stage of diagnostics and treatment. So I mentioned the image interpretation of like radiology and mammogram, but also dosages, personal medicine. For example, we have now medical devices that do have AI. It's a very recent development of approving autonomous treatment, like you know, the millions of people who have type 1 diabetes and also type 2 sometimes that have insulin pumps and have a continuous glucose monitor. Only a couple of years ago, the FDA approved these closed loops where the pump is talking to actually the continuous glucose monitor is talking to the pump, and then the pump is making autonomous decisions that used to be made by patients in a very taxing way and a very inaccurate way a lot of the times, and slower way. And so that has been really life-saving. So really the kind of direct reduction of human error in calculating treatment. But then ChatGPT, and this is true, I'll say this for doctors, but this is true with any profession, it's also enabling professionals to deal with a huge problem that we have in, I think, most or all societies, which is shortages of staff and burnout. Government officials, of course, have that, you know, all the paperwork. But specifically with doctors, there's a lot of evidence that they're leaving the profession and they are quite miserable a lot of times because of what they call the inbox burnout, that they're doing much more paperwork than the direct work of healing and human interaction, which is why they went to the profession. And I've been really kind of in dialogue with doctors thinking about how these technologies can help them get back to the original thinking or doing of why they went into the profession. So that, again, I think it's a kind of shift from the mindset of thinking about AI as simply replacing us, rather than thinking about it as helping us as a tool, giving us a comparative advantage, where humans can devote more of their time to the human interaction. And doctors mostly report that they didn't go into the profession to calculate dosages and then email things. And there was a YouTube video that went viral where a physician was showing how he's using ChatGPT to appeal all these decisions by insurance providers, where he was giving like patients some just reference to do some treatments or diagnostics, and the insurers kept denying it. So he was spending a lot of his time writing all those appeals, and now ChatGPT is doing it for him. So that's a really nice example. It also, I think, has been giving patients a lot of empowerment to help them understand their own health, the recommendations, to adhere to the treatment. So there's very good studies that personalized AI that kind of, just like I was describing with Paro, that prompts patients about when they need to exercise and take their medicine and do all kinds of things, that it's not just that it gives the prompts, it learns about how people learn. So some people are better with the incentives that are more like the sticks of, you're gonna, get sicker if you don't do this, and so like these more harsh motivational things, and some need less prompts, they need the kind of a different style, and this is a lot of kind of the research that's going in right now to personalize that kind of care. And then very, very importantly, and lastly, is the access and the reduction of costs to healthcare. So again, Germany has a different healthcare system. Traditionally, I would say, you're much more of like a social democratic country that has great, universal healthcare. I would guess, without knowing too much, that it's still not like ideal and optimal and not really equal in every way, right? That the people that are wealthier do have the better care and treatment, and there's a lot of cost and shortages. And so scaling access is a very, very important aspect of my own thinking, and I think of the opportunities that are presented by AI. And again, everything that I said right now is just, that's applicable to every kind of service. It's not really just about health. I just think that health is a very kind of intuitive and low-hanging fruit there. In general, like the fact that now with ChatGPT 4, and it's just going to get, stronger, but there's DALL-E that's embedded in it, and, there's all these different aspects of creating videos and creating images and creating text. It means that we're, at the moment where we can do a lot of things that we couldn't do before. So for example, this is me being creative with just like how AI can help us at work. I would not be able to create images. I'm, not that artistic or savvy, like, using technology. But this all happens so fast, and there's just a lot of new opportunities for workers and industries everywhere. Again, never denying that it's also, because it's so powerful, it can replace some of us in some ways. So we can talk more about that. But I mentioned this techlash, and one of the things that is really important for me to emphasize is that we have to be constructively, cautiously optimistic. First, because the train has left the station. AI is all around us. AI is being integrated by all, Fortune 500 companies, and both in the private sector and the public sector. So, we have to talk about this seriously, and it's just not the nature of technology that you put the genie back in the bottle. But much more than that, and just more importantly, is that I think that, it's not that we just okay, let's embrace it because it's here and we can't put it back in the bottle. We also don't want to put it back in the bottle, both because of all the things that I just described, like all the positive aspects, but also because there are ways to think about the technology and to direct it for good that have, I think, been missed in the public conversation. So I want to suggest that we've been having a lot of the public conversations and also the research conversation. I actually see it it's very much a failure across disciplines. If you look at sociology of technology and you look at things that are coming out of legal scholars and business scholars and just different analyses, I see these patterns of fallacies across the board. And I think it's really important for us to check ourselves and to have these rational conversations. So if anything, that I think we can all do is to try to help ourselves and others in these conversations avoid automation fallacies. So what are these automation fallacies? I don't even mean the Terminator fallacy. That's kind of this big overarching, fear that AI will rise up and destroy us. That I mentioned already, that we need to think about that technology that's not here, and I think maybe most of computer scientists actually don't think that that's very likely as a scenario. But it's definitely not the technology that's here. So we can think about that, but I'm talking more about the technology that is here and whether we are going to approve it, like the self-driving cars. When are we going to approve them? Like the different healthcare applications, like putting social robots in schools. So what are these fallacies? So first is, I think, this double standard fallacy, or the lack of a comparative advantage question. Time and again, when you look at the different discussions on different sectors that are embracing AI, you hear a lot about AI bias and AI fails and AI is not safe. Like with the cars, you see reports, you see the media saying an Uber taxi got into an accident in Arizona. So absolutely, we're not getting into that car. And of course, that's not the right question to ask, whether it's 100% safe. The question is always whether the AI is safer than the status quo, the existing way that we do things, the human driver, right? And we know that with driving, of course, human error is the vast majority of accidents, 94%, to be precise, according to a lot of statistics. So again, thinking about it as, is it outperforming what we have right now, rather than expecting perfection, is a really important thing to insist on in every investigation. And again, I'm very critical of a lot of reports that I see that just kind of say, oh, there was AI bias, there wasn't even selection across demographics. And as somebody who studies employment discrimination and has been, investigating sources of biases and skewed hiring, for example, in a lot of different employment, for a lot of different companies, a lot of different employers, it's always very frustrating to see that kind of oh, we're not ready to apply a AI that's looking through resumes because it's not, equal across all the different demographics, when we know that human conscious and unconscious bias is very, very deep and strong and stagnant. And, I've written a lot about the gender and racial pay gaps and how stagnant they've been, how difficult it is for ourselves to understand our own motivations of how we assess performance and how we do hiring, how we give pay. So always insisting on the on the comparative approach rather than having a double standard. The second fallacy, and it's related, is that we tend to kind of see a fail and say the technology is not ready and not update. What is the comparative advantage vis-a-vis like humans to actually improve the AI and to monitor it and to audit it? And again, if I'll use the same example of hiring application, you probably heard, I'll ask you again, like how many of you have heard this story of Amazon trying to do a hiring app and it ended up only hiring men who play lacrosse, who are white, who named Jared? You've heard this story. If you watch John Oliver, very recently he's described that same story. This is a 10-year-old story. What's not mentioned by reporters, by, kind of in articles, I've researched, how many times this kind of story of fail is mentioned and research, like dropping a footnote. What's not mentioned is, A, this technology was never deployed because Amazon had the ability to audit it, unlike when they're not auditing their HR people for bias every time they give them a task to sort. Here there was real-time auditing before deployment. They figured out what the reason was, which is very kind of an obvious reason for the bias, which is that they were feeding the training data to the algorithm of who were hired before, right? And those people were hired by humans, and it reflected the skewed version of, at Amazon of who are the best engineers. And there's a better way. Computer scientists have been developing it for a long time to now have sorting algorithms. You actually direct the algorithm to look for under appreciated factors and talents and kind of types of experience. You have two, actually the gold standard has become to have two algorithms that are operating together, where one is doing the sorting and the second one is in real time, all the time, looking for equity across different demographics. So again, thinking about the comparative advantage of the improvement trajectory of humans or the status quo versus AI applications is very important, and it's a fallacy not to do that and to rehash the same failure stories. A third fallacy, and I alluded to that already also, is ignoring scarcity. So I think a good example, again, from health would be that let's say you're a regulatory agency and you're trying to figure out whether a bot radiologist or an application, just like a software that does screening for certain conditions is ready for deployment in hospitals. And you'll see these reports are saying, well, if we take the two best radiologists in Germany, human radiologists, they're at 79% accuracy, and this bot is only at 75% accuracy, so it's not ready. And that's, I think, real hubris of ignoring the fact that most people don't have access to the two best radiologists, that there's huge costs for it, there's shortages of staff, and certainly that's even truer when we're thinking outside of developed countries like the United States and Germany. So really thinking about the opportunities of scaling and access is really, I think, again, it would be a real, I think, irresponsible move for people who are like you know, thinking about the public good and wherever, you know, discipline you're coming at it from, and really thinking about kind of scaling. I can say the same thing exactly with access to justice. So if you're thinking about, you know, like who gets represented by lawyers, what are the costs of lawyers, there's not universal lawyering in Germany, right? Like, you know, there's some public defense and stuff like that, but most people never get, for very important things in their lives, legal representation, like, you know, signing a job contract or getting a divorce and things like that, legal aid and all. So there's, or filing for a patent, whatever it is, and there's great opportunities there to think about access. And this is just a behavioral fallacy, the fact that losses loom larger than risks, or sorry, losses loom larger than gains. This is something that's not unique to technology, but it's very much shaping the way that we're thinking about technology right now, which is we have this behavioral failure or fallacy or bias that we tend to kind of appreciate the things that we already have in a different way than if we didn't have it and we're just thinking kind of in pure, clear terms of what is better. So you may have, you know, heard about the endowment effect, where like if you already own something, even if it's a pretty kind of identical thing that you can get easily in the store, you tend to value it and price it in a higher way than if you're just kind of choosing between the things. And people just are really kind of risk averse of shifting. And I think we see that with, like, you know, any shift, like automation in production and services, and, you know, like what are our defaults in like a human taxi driver or a bot taxi driver. And then one before the last one, fallacy, and Volker, I'm curious what you think about this, but there's a lot of kind of privileging of, especially in Europe, we've been getting, you know, the Brussels effect of like the GDPR already, of privileging privacy over other public values. Privacy is important, but AI needs data to be more accurate, and we need to have frank discussions about what is it that's lost, what is really personalized information. We had a talk about that, or a couple of talks at the conference. I think that there's a fallacy that privacy is always protective and protective more of the people who are vulnerable and the weak. And sometimes that's true, yes, but sometimes it's absolutely the reverse. Sometimes actually knowing more and collecting more data can correct years of biases and inequities where the weak have been kind of not counted, not seen. We have in healthcare, it's another, you know, good example with, to use healthcare. We've had a lot of clinical trials and years of medicine that were focused on the male physicality, and there's kind of an opportunity to correct a lot of those data sets and excluded demographics across ethnicity lines. So again, it's, you know, if you do feminist theory, you know that privacy has always been a sword and a shield. You know, sometimes privacy is good, but sometimes it's kind of alternating with secrecy, and I've written quite a bit about non-disclosure agreements and hiding sexual harassment and, you know, like corporate corruption and all kinds of things. So we have to think about, you know, those trade-offs and be frank about them. And then the last one I did allude to, again, that I think there's a fallacy of conflating between tech readiness its safety, its accuracy, and its effects at large, like how much it will be disruptive of the market. So for example, with labor unions being very fearful of being replaced in certain professions, I think that's a valid fear, but we have to think about the costs and benefits of life-saving technology, and then sometimes it's really worthwhile of thinking about solutions to the loss of jobs in a very different way and separate way from kind of just slowing down the application. So I'll just go through this quite quickly. Is there an AI law? Yes, there is an AI, EU Act. There are AI executive orders and proposals, also in the United States. But it's not clear that we can always talk about an AI law as kind of a bundle that will be relevant to all applications. And it's also, I think, the case that, especially with the EU Act, I think we lack some language to talk about the benefits and not just the costs and the risks of AI. So the EU Act is very risk-oriented. It asks us to assess risks. But I don't see in the EU Act enough of the fleshing out of the trade-offs, the cost and benefit analysis, what I was describing, the comparative advantage question. It doesn't call for that. And what then becomes true, it also doesn't have any language about a moment where it would actually be the right decision to demand automation. So we have a right in the EU Act, AI Act, and we also have that kind of language in the GDPR of allowing for citizens to ask for a human in the loop, to ask for human options and things like that. I think we're very much nearing a moment where we have to also talk about the right to ask for automation, the right to ask for a shift to safer, more equitable, less biased systems than we have in human decision making. And again, this is a very underdeveloped area. I have this language of automation rights in my articles, but I haven't found it anywhere else. So I think there's a lot of work that can be done, and I hope some of you will be doing that kind of work. But similarly, I can say the same thing about data rights, where we have a lot of language and a lot of laws about privacy. We have much less laws about the rights of citizens to be counted, to require training data that's fuller, representative, that counts them. And we have very little language talking about the kind of how do we constitute the right kind of tech trust rights so that people are not wrongfully mistrusting AI, not overly trusting, but not under-trusting. So in the kind of psychology, cognitive sciences, there's a nascent field of looking at algorithmic adoration and algorithmic aversion, if you know that literature. But there's a lot more work to be done of the human-machine interaction, and then developing language of what does social welfare look like in the AI era. So of course that's a frontier. Volker said that he wants me to connect this a little bit to my books. So my previous books are about competition and public options and innovation policy, and we need to think about market dominance and the winners and losers of AI applications, and really kind of think about when we need government to invest. So again, it's something that's lacking, I think, in the EU AI thinking. In the Biden executive order, from last year. I think it's much better, where President Biden does talk about like investments, a lot of investments and developing and research of AI, and having, there are some like sandboxes and test beds here, and there is investment, but I just think that we need more of a framework for all of that. So I said behavioral, human, machine trust policy, we need to develop more of that, and I showed you the regulatory pyramid, just thinking about this in much more complex ways than just kind of look at what's risky and then, you know, slow it down or do some auditing. And then this is just kind of because I'm here in Berlin for also for the network law review journal and the Weizenbaum conference on generative AI. I'm just showing you the article that I wrote for this conference, which is, I think, an example of doing that kind of more nuanced and contextual thinking about how do we incentivize better thinking and better design of AI, where, for example, I think both in Europe and in the United States, we have these right to know in a lot of the, certainly in the EU Act, like if you're, the right to know that you're interacting with Eliza or with a chatbot, right? And what I say is, well, the right to know is a complicated scenario. Like sometimes I want to know, but sometimes maybe if I have over aversion as a passenger, as a consumer, as a citizen, maybe it will, as a patient, maybe it actually create other harms. So we have to be very empirical of what are we trying, when should we be notified, why should we be notified in the design of AI policy. So just kind of as a summary, because I want to get to our conversation, I think it's really useful to think about AI as a tool, not an adversary, recognizing that sometimes it will create replacement, but there's a lot of room for integration of it, looking for the complementarities, looking to educate the public, educate all of us, including researchers, to ask the right questions, like the comparative advantage question. I think everybody should be playing with ChatGPT, with Bard, making them compete with one another, with other AI applications, and to be very frank about the trade-offs. For example, what I said about privacy. Privacy is a great thing. I love privacy, not as much as some people, but maybe more than other people. But I think privacy is one value, and it has to be on the same playing field of other rights like equality and freedoms and health and social welfare. And we've always had tensions between these different values and normative goals that we have. I think AI is helping make those very salient. Sometimes it can help mitigate the tensions between them, but we're never going to get everything at the same time. And we have to be frank about those tensions. Thinking about distributional effects, multi-leveled governance, and really, just to end, thinking about AI as potentially the great democratizer, envisioning how we can use it to create more access, liberties, creativity, and well-being. So I'll stop here. And I look forward to your questions. Thank you.